Welcome to A Missionary Moment. My name is John Schockle. I'm happy to be sitting down today with Maddie Flanders, who is a senior student here at the University of Wisconsin-Platteville. And we're going to be talking about Maddie's conversion story to the Catholic faith, which happened how many years ago now, Maddie?
Just about 3. It'll be 3 next month.
So did you enter on the Easter Vigil?
No, it was about 3 weeks later.
3 weeks later.
Yeah, we just we couldn't finish the RCIA class in time, and the guy I was going through RCIA with had a track meet that weekend, and it was a away meet, so he wasn't going to be back in time.
So you're like a Catholic toddler.
Yeah.
You're 3 and just started to getting acclimated to the house, the Father's house, the church, and so forth. Okay, well, great. Thank you for sitting down.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, happy to have you on the show. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, a bit of the background, and what led you to this point, basically. So perhaps you can just kind of have at it, give an overarching backdrop. Yeah,
so growing up, I obviously wasn't Catholic. When I was really little, we did go to like a Lutheran, very heavy in the praise and worship. I couldn't even tell you what denomination it was, but it was never something that I looked forward to, mainly because my parents made me get out of bed to go, and I was like 6, and I was like, it's 7 o'clock in the morning. Once I got to middle school, we just stopped going, and I never saw my parents super active in their faith life anyway. And I just, from that point on, I just lived a very anxious life. Like every teenager has anxiety because everyone's self-conscious and you're trying to fit in, but it was like a debilitating kind of anxiety. I struggled to sometimes even go to class because I was so nervous about the exam I had, even though I had studied for 3 hours. Once I graduated, I was coming to college. I made the decision, I was like, I'm going to join a church. But I thought I was going to look at every church except the Catholic Church.
Except the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Even implicitly, just knowing that there's something about that church that's different.
Yeah, and it was just the community I grew up in. There was just a negative view of the church. The church was seen as hateful because of the views on same-sex marriage, which I have now learned isn't anything like what I was taught the view was. So my plan was to every Sunday try out a different church until I found something I liked. We didn't even get that far, let's just say that. Because welcome weekend freshman year, I went to the free bowling they had with my roommate, and since it was free, it was really busy, so they were pairing up groups in line. So I got paired. Me and my roommate got paired with 2 of the campus ministers.
What are the odds?
Yeah.
But they're doing their job, I guess. Out there smelling like the sheep.
Yeah.
Pope Francis says.
Yep. Like, they mentioned nothing about working for the church. We just had a good time. All got along, exchanged contact information to potentially do something again in the future. It was great. I thought, I made some friends. Awesome. Haley kept inviting me to more and more things at the church.
Haley is the campus missionary?
Yeah. And so...
She was a focus missionary at the time?
No, it was her first year as a campus minister.
Okay.
She had made that transition. I think that was her transition year.
Okay.
I can't really remember, but she was...
She was a focus missionary for 2 years and then became a campus missionary here.
Yep. So it was after like 2 or 3 events that I came to that I figured out she worked for the church. It didn't bug me or anything. I was just like, oh, okay, interesting. Guess she's not a student. And so I continued to come to events at St. Augustine. After a while, like after Welcome Weekend, the group started to get smaller as the events started to get more specific. So I was like hiding the fact I wasn't Catholic. So I was nervous that they were like my new friends were going to reject me because I was like the odd one out. They didn't, and they wouldn't. I just wasn't confident at that point in time that they wouldn't. I was actually working at the student center with a couple of the girls who hung out at the Newman Center. Another girl lived on my wing, and so there was just, I knew people everywhere that also hung out at the church.
So you had all these different ties, perhaps some of them more hidden or subtle, but your friends just naturally seemed to be associated with the Newman Center.
Yeah.
Interesting. So then you started to get more involved and come around here then?
Yep, and I have a really hard time studying in my room, just because of all these distractions, like there's a TV, there's a computer, there's all these things I'd want to do besides study. So I would come here to the study room and study with my friends. So then October of my first year, it's like mid-October, most of my friends went to the 6:30 a.m. Mass, but...
Hardcore.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I thought that was, at that point in time, I was like, that's the weirdest thing, you're going to get up to go to church at 6:30 in the morning, and it's in Latin.
I thought I was hardcore when I was getting up in college at 7:30 a.m. And then I became a dad, I guess. And now all of a sudden, if I'm sleeping past 5:30, I'm like, what's happening? The day is slipping away.
Yeah.
I digress. It's funny how things change.
Yeah. Yep. And so, like, I thought they were crazy. Like, why would you get up to go to 6:30 Latin Mass? Like, that's the weirdest thing ever. Even I'd never been to any Mass in my life.
Yeah.
So, downstairs studying right before the 5 p.m. Mass, David, who is in your role as the team lead for the Focus Missionaries, comes in and is like, you know, who's all going to go to Mass? And everyone else pretty much already had. And then he gets to me and he's like, what about you? And this was the moment where it was coming out that I wasn't Catholic. I was like, I looked at him and was like, I have never been to Mass in my life. And the room got quiet. I was like, well, my secret's out now. And so there was just this awkward moment of silence before David was like, that's fine, I can help you through it. And I'm like, well, I guess we're going then. So I said yes, and he explained that in the hymnal there's a guide to go through the Mass, which I was like, good, I'm gonna need it.
Yeah, right.
So I went from my baseline anxiety to like, this is new, this is something I wasn't anticipating doing, and it's something that I'm not comfortable with. So like, my anxiety was heightened, and so I was following along very closely, and never being to Mass, I didn't realize there was so much movement between standing and sitting and kneeling. So that was...
It's a workout. I mean, Catholicism is very integrated. The liturgy, mind, soul, and body.
Yes.
100%.
Yep. And so I was just like, how does everyone know when to do this? But now I know it's just because you do it at the same time every time. Right. But I was astonished that everyone knew what to do.
Yeah.
And so I was just really nervous the entire time, not really totally paying attention to what was going on, because I was more concerned with looking like I was fitting in than actually being present in what was happening. But that all changed when the bells of the consecration rang. It was just like this overwhelming calm, like, washed over me. I felt more peace in that moment than I could remember ever having before. And in that moment, I realized there was something more happening, because they're very beautiful bells, but I've heard bells before. So I was like, there's more to this than just the noise I heard. There's something else bringing me peace. So after Mass, David was like, well, what'd you think? And I was like, oh, I had no idea what was going on, but I'm gonna go again. So I started going about once a week with different friends who would help me through it.
So circling back real quick, so you're at Mass there for the first time, and so you've heard bells before. Who hasn't heard bells before? But you get into Mass, the context of the liturgy, the context of physically kneeling down. The priest raises the host, there's absolute silence, and then the bells ring. And so I really like that. There's like a big liturgical and theological insight there for what so many of my non-Catholic Christian friends point out as sort of a barrier. Like, here's why I'm not Catholic, because Catholics have so much baggage. Like, you have to do this, and you have all these physical things, and you're like attached to these physical things, statues and so forth, and why do you use incense? But here, instead, you are disposed to that, the perceivable sound of the bells, or here they love to use a lot of incense. The smell of the incense sort of ushers one's spirit along, one's soul along, one's mind and body along, even. From the perceivable to the imperceivable. Yeah. And here, like, essentially what you're explaining is the power of sacrament, or of signs. Sensible signs which bring us to insensible or imperceivable realities. In this case, the presence of God.
Yeah.
The bells, the incense, the elevation of the host. Bring our senses to the sacred reality of God's presence there.
Yep. Yeah. Which wasn't something I cognitively understood. Like, I didn't even know that the church taught that is God.
Wow, fascinating.
So that wasn't even something that crossed my mind. There was just like this switch of, there's something here, I don't know what it is.
And the switch was from anxiety to peace?
Yep.
Anxiety to peace. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so then you started going to Mass more, and what happened then? What were some other touch points along the path?
I think the next important one was this was right before Thanksgiving. I went on the women's retreat. We went up to St. Mary's in Fenimore, which is a very beautiful church. And so the first thing we did was we just did a bunch of fun things, like we did arts and crafts, and then we went up to the chapel for a talk. Don't remember what the talk was on, but I know it was good. And then they're like, okay, so now we're gonna have an hour for adoration and confession so we can reflect on the talk. And I was like, cool, so that means prayer time to think about what we just heard. I'd never been to adoration before, so Father John comes out wearing something different, which I was confused every single time he wore something different.
Every time I look at that man, he's got a liturgical vestment for everything in the book. If it's raining outside, different liturgical vestment.
Yep.
If it's sunny and 53 degrees, it's like, where did you get that different looking cassock?
Yeah.
Speaking hyperbolically, of course, but...
Yep. But, like, so before that, he was wearing, there was times where he was wearing different colors, and I didn't understand that yet. Now, every time I'm just like, what's with the changing? Why doesn't he wear the same thing?
Yeah.
But when he comes out to expose the host, Haley, the same campus minister, comes running down the middle aisle to jump into the pew next to me to explain to me what was going to happen, because I had no idea. So after that, we were just praying, and I made the decision. It's like, this is something I want to do. I don't know what it was in prayer, but it's like, you need to go talk to Father John. One thing I understood was I couldn't go to confession, so I waited for everyone else to have their turn to go to confession, and then I went back. It's like, hey, Father, it's Maddie. Like, we're not doing a confession because I know I can't do that.
Because you weren't Catholic.
Because I wasn't Catholic. Yeah. And so I was like, but I have a couple of questions for you. And he was very taken aback, like wasn't expecting that. And so I asked him how one joins the church. And so he explained to me who to reach out to on his staff who was running the RCIA class. And we went through a whole bunch of like how long the process takes, what it all involves. And so then after women's retreat was over and I went home, I called up the campus minister who was running that, and we set a time every week to meet, and I started the RCA. I think we waited until after Thanksgiving break just because it would have been an awkward jump in. So started that before the end of first semester, and that was the next big step towards the conversion.
So you go on retreat. It's interesting. Again, this is for you, and hearing you talk about it, this is another sort of thing where you were becoming closer to becoming Catholic, even though you were in an uncomfortable situation.
Yeah.
That's striking to me, because a lot of people, well, it's natural, me, when I'm, if I'm being converted to something or an idea, not necessarily the church, just
Yeah.
Like what the best flavor of ice cream is. Right?
Yeah.
That's perhaps a poor example. But usually I do that on my own terms.
Mm-hmm.
When it's comfy for me and what have you. But here, first going to Mass was a little bit uncomfortable, and it was, you're a little bit anxious. And I would imagine that when you went back to confession for the first time, it was also marked by a little bit of anxiety of, I've never done this, but for me right now, I've been to confession, regularly.
Mm-hmm.
I shoot for a couple times a month.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes need it more. Rachel's never told me that I need it less. So, but since I was 7 years old, and I still get a little nervous.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, which I think is natural. But here you are, going for the first time, not Catholic, never having been through it. And it's still a moment of deeper invitation of your, it sounds like your mind and your heart receiving a kind of peace amid anxiety or nervousness or uncertainty.
Yeah.
Isn't it good how God comes to give us peace?
Yeah. I think
in the storm.
It's my favorite gift of the Holy Spirit.
It's the gift of peace.
Mm-hmm.
That's, wow. Yeah. Wow. Okay, so then you enter RCIA, and you enter it just after Thanksgiving of your first semester of freshman year.
Yep.
So you're just a couple months in. You're a few months in here.
Yeah.
And it went from, I'm going to any church other than the Catholic Church to, I'm entering the Catholic Church formally.
Yeah. I never actually went to any other church. I never got that far.
How about that?
Yeah.
God's designs.
Yep.
Yeah. So, how did your family respond?
I didn't tell them right away. They knew I was hanging out at the Newman Center because my mom actually was tracking my phone at the time, just because she was... I only have a twin sister and we both left, so she was like an empty nester and my kids, they're gone. And so it's relative, it's not super accurate. So being at the church, it's only half a block off from all the frat houses. So she was like, why are you hanging out at the frat houses? And I send her a picture of Father John and she's like, oh, never mind. So they thought,
you're at a church, you must be okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
So they knew that's where my friends were, and they're like, it's probably the last place that you're going to get into trouble, so we're not going to question it. My sister was the one who wasn't super happy when I ended up telling them a few months. I think I waited, it was second semester when I told them. Because my sister we grew up being taught that Catholics hated gay people. That it's not that we as Catholics don't agree with their choices and think it's sinful, but we still love them as human beings. She thought that Catholics just disliked them as people. And having gay uncles, she's like, well, what's going to happen with your relationship with them? And I'm like, nothing. I love them just the same. It took her a long time to fully understand that nothing was going to change when it came to my relationship with them, besides the fact that they now openly know that I disagree with their choices.
And you perhaps, by God's grace, able to love them more and even better, right? There's so many ill-conceived and, so many people. Fulton Sheen famously said that in America, there's not 100 people that hate Catholicism, but there's hundreds of thousands of people that hate what they think Catholicism is.
Yeah.
An institution, a cold institution that shuts its doors to people who struggle with same-sex attraction, people who worship Mary, cannibalism, although that sort of died out maybe a couple centuries ago, that problem with it, de-emphasis of the scripture, the baggage of having to go to, do you need to go to a priest, or isn't God powerful enough? And all of these false dichotomies and false problems that just lead to disillusionment. And it's not even their fault. I'm meeting with so many. It's my fault, really. It's more today. It seems to me that it's more Catholics' fault than non-Catholics' fault, because we are the voice of the church in many ways, right? We ought to be. How can we expect a non-Catholic to be able to rightly understand and believe what the Catholic Church teaches?
Yeah.
And it's definitely a temptation as a Catholic, much less a Christian, but in this context, a Catholic just sort of stay quiet but no. You know, St. Peter tells us in his first letter, 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, always be ready to make a defense or an explanation of your faith. Not in a defensive, like prevent defense kind of way, but in a proactive kind of way. Because why? We have the consolation of the truth.
Yep.
Christ gives his church, his people, so many gifts. And the Catholic Church has all of the gifts that Christ wants to give his people. There's so many non-Catholic Protestants, non-Catholic Christians rather, who have many of the gifts. Excellent homilies and arousing sermons to faith. A very Pentecostal and enlivened view of the church.
Yeah.
A deep love for scripture studies and so forth. And to that, I think the Catholic Church says, that's awesome. We invite you to also embrace the power that is the Eucharist, the power of Catholicity or unity, the power of Mary, the Queen Mother of God, and so forth. So for you, as you're grappling with this intellectually or even perhaps emotionally, spiritually, what were some of the key sticking points for you of why you decided to cross the Tiber, as it were, and become Catholic?
Yeah, so the number one thing that went over my mind was when I made the decision, I started going to Mass when I was back home with my uncle, my Uncle Caesar, who's married into my family. He's the only other Catholic in my family. And no matter what church I went to, any Catholic church I went to, everything was the same. The message was the same, the readings were the same for the day, like everything happened in the same way. I'm like, in my mind, like, if this isn't true, then there's just a bunch of people doing the same wrong thing. But I don't think that the world's, Catholicism is the second largest religion in the world. I think, maybe. I know Christianity is.
Christianity is.
I know that Islam has more people right now. So being the world's second largest religion, it's like, I don't think there's that many people getting the same thing wrong, because it's all consistent.
So the consistency, the universality of teaching, of practice, brought you to a sort of intellectual awareness of, okay, this could be true.
Yeah.
That's good, isn't it? Because oftentimes people hear Catholic and they think institution. Instead of Catholic, as it comes from the Greek word kataholis, which means according to the whole, or to be Catholic is to be universal, is to be part of a universal truth or a universal movement. And that's a forgotten element of being Catholic. It's not a weird cultish institutional sect. It is the universal Church of Christ, by which every tongue and culture can enter into his family. So, okay, so that sort of won over your head, so to speak.
Yeah. And then there was the two things that won over my heart were, one, the Eucharist, and just every time, whether it was going to Mass or being in adoration, just the peace that I experienced when I was in front of the Eucharist was just amazing. And the second one is Mary. Like, I just love the idea of her interceding on our behalf. Like, just the ultimate loving figure that isn't God, that can help you get to God. One of my favorite songs is Queen of Peace by Florence and the Machine. And it was one of my favorite songs before I became Catholic. But now looking at it from a Catholic perspective, it's just a song describing the love between Mary and Jesus. And I think that's what drew me to it in the beginning, and I didn't even know it. And so just the beauty of the relationship between Mary and Jesus, and then we can experience something, obviously not as fully as they experienced it, but we can have that loving relationship with
Mhm.
Mary. It was another thing that won over my heart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it was a 1-2 combo there. One of my friends, one of my best friends from college, his dad is returning to the church, or has returned to the church for the last couple months for the first time in 30 years for being away. And you know what he said the top 2 reasons for returning to the church was? It's Catholicity, so the universality of the church.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't just some denomination started by John Smith down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Having its roots back to Christ and apostolic union and
Yeah.
succession. And number 2, he said, is the Eucharist. If Jesus is present in the Eucharist, then I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
If he's not, I'll have to look elsewhere. But if the church has that right, what else might it have right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so what would you, briefly, if you were put on the spot, like you are right now, and said, okay, Maddie, you have, what reasons would you give, or what encouragement, I suppose, or words would you share with somebody who might be on the fence with becoming Catholic, or with even thinking about the idea?
I think to convince their mind, I'd ask them if they believe in truth. Like, do you believe there is truth in the world? Because we live in a culture where there isn't. It's your truth. Whatever you think and whatever you believe is the truth. But Catholicism is the truth. It's the word. Like, we have the Word of God. We try to follow the instructions as best we can. We mess up sometimes, but we do our best. And so I think that to convince somebody who's looking at it from a mind perspective, you should talk about the truth. And then from their heart, I think it really depends on the person. You need to find whatever is hurting them, because wherever you're hurt is where God can come in to heal you the most. So finding whatever that is, and whether it's a vice that they're struggling with and that's impacting their life, or a bad experience, finding that and showing them how God can help them work through that.
Right. Like, most essentially, I suppose that's the Eucharist, right? The presence of the divine physician.
Yep.
It's sort of like spiritual radiation therapy.
Yeah.
Being before the divine physician, his presence heals us. Gosh. Well, yeah. Well, thanks for coming on the show Missionary Moment, and for sharing your testimony.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, God bless you in your endeavors after college here as you move on.
Thanks.
Okay, folks, thanks for joining us for this edition of Missionary Moment. If you enjoyed this video, you know the lines. Hit the like button, subscribe, share it if you'd like. But God bless, and until next time, be saints.